Have you ever truly been invisible? Not the superpower you dreamed of as a child, but a crushing, soul-eating void where you used to be. It's a silence that screams, a cold that seeps past your clothes and into your bones, a permanent chill that has nothing to do with the weather. For David, this wasn't a metaphor. It was the biting reality of Tuesday and Wednesday, and every day that bled into the next. He learned the human eye is a remarkable instrument, capable of looking directly through a person as if they were glass. He was a ghost, haunting the periphery of a world that was once his, a silent specter on streets that no longer recognized his footsteps. Survival became a brutal, relentless calculus. Each sunrise brought not hope, but a series of desperate equations. Where to find water clean enough to drink? Which dumpster behind which restaurant was least likely to be guarded? How many hours could he sit in the library before the sympathetic but firm security guard asked him to leave? His world, once filled with deadlines and dinner plans, had shrunk to the size of his own aching feet. Every step was a negotiation with pain. Every pang of hunger was a deafening roar in his mind, drowning out the memories of who he used to be. This wasn't living, it was the slow, methodical process of being erased, one basic human need at a time. But the physical decay was a gentle whisper compared to the psychological storm. The city's indifference was an acid, slowly dissolving his identity. He was no longer David, the architect who loved classic films and the smell of old books. He was that guy on the corner, an obstacle, a statistic, a problem to be solved by being ignored. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making each breath a conscious effort. He began to forget the sound of his own last name, spoken with respect. He started to believe the reflection he saw in darkened storefront windows, a hollowed-out stranger with haunted eyes. This is the true horror of the abyss. It convinces you that you belong there. Sometimes a scent would betray him, the waft of fresh brewed coffee from a cafe door, a phantom limb of a life he once lived. He would remember mornings with his wife, the easy warmth of their kitchen, the weight of a ceramic mug in his hands. He'd recall the crisp feel of a new shirt, the satisfaction of a completed project, the simple, forgotten luxury of closing his own front door and feeling safe. These memories were not a comfort, they were daggers. They were cruel reminders of a universe that existed just on the other side of a pane of glass, a world he could see and smell, but could no longer touch. It was a torture, designed to break what little spirit he had left. He finally reached a point where the days no longer had names. There was only the before the cold and the during the cold. Hope had become a dangerous, foreign currency he could no longer afford. He found a discarded piece of cardboard, a pathetic shield against the unforgiving concrete, and curled into himself behind a forgotten monument in the park. The city lights, once a symbol of ambition and life, now just mocked him with their warmth. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to surrender. He was done fighting. He was ready for the invisibility to become permanent. And it was in that precise moment of absolute surrender, in the deepest, darkest corner of the abyss, that a single, unexpected sound cut through the night. It wasn't a grand event that changed the trajectory of his life. There was no lightning strike, no divine intervention. It was the simple, accidental sound of a book falling from a shelf in the public library, a place he used not for knowledge, but for the simple dignity of warmth and a chair that didn't belong to the street. The heavy thud on the worn carpet was an unwelcome noise in the cathedral of silence, drawing a few annoyed glances. For him, it was just another piece of background noise in a life defined by it. He didn't look up, didn't react. Invisibility was a skill honed over 1,000 lonely days, a cloak he wore to survive. Why would this be any different? He was a ghost haunting the aisles, a specter among the living who came to read about worlds he could never touch. But then, a voice cut through the stillness, and it was directed at him. "Excuse me, I think this might be yours." He finally looked up, his eyes taking a moment to focus on the source. A woman stood there holding a thick leather-bound copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He hadn't even realized it had slipped from his lap. He saw her not as an angel or a savior, but as an anomaly, a glitch in the system of public indifference. She wasn't dressed extravagantly, nor did she carry an air of condescending charity. There was just a quiet sincerity in her eyes, a look that bypassed the torn jacket and the weary lines on his face, and seemed to be searching for something else. Entirely, she didn't flinch, didn't hold her breath, didn't take a half step back. She just stood there, waiting. His first instinct was suspicion, a bitter and familiar taste in his mouth. What was the angle? People with kind eyes were often the most dangerous. They offered a sliver of hope only to snatch it away, leaving a deeper, colder void than before. Was she a missionary? A student conducting a social experiment? He braced himself for the inevitable pivot, the pamphlet, the pitying smile, the request for a story he was tired of telling. His own voice felt like a rusty gate, unused and stiff, as he managed a barely audible mumble of thanks. He reached for the book, his hand trembling slightly, half expecting her to pull it back at the last second. But she simply placed it gently into his hands, her fingers briefly brushing his, a touch devoid of revulsion. It was a simple human contact, yet it felt as foreign and shocking as a live wire. She didn't leave. Instead, she gestured to the book. "That's a heavy one to carry around," she said, her tone light and conversational. "Are you a fan of the Stoics?" The question was so unexpected, so normal, that it disarmed him completely. It wasn't about his situation. It was about his mind. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, someone was engaging with his intellect, not his poverty. He found himself answering, the words clumsy at first, then flowing with a forgotten ease. They spoke for a few minutes, about philosophy, about the tyranny of fortune and the power of perception. She listened, truly listened, nodding and asking follow-up questions that showed she wasn't just being polite. She saw the man who read philosophy in a library, not the man who slept in a doorway. She was holding up a mirror to a self he thought had vanished. The conversation ended as quietly as it began. She had to leave, a meeting to get to. There was no grand promise, no offer of a job or a home. She simply said, "My name is Eleanor. I'm here most Tuesdays. It was really nice talking to you." And then she was gone. He sat there, the book feeling heavier in his lap now, but for a different reason. It was weighted with the significance of the encounter. Eleanor, a name, a day, an invitation not to receive charity, but to have another conversation. The silence of the library returned, but it was fundamentally altered. The oppressive quiet of his own isolation had been pierced by a single voice. A flicker of warmth spread through his chest, a fragile, unfamiliar feeling that wasn't from the library's heating system. It was the first ember of a forgotten fire, a glimmer of light in the endless concrete. Belief is a fragile seed, but action is the soil in which it grows. The path back from the abyss wasn't a single heroic leap. It was 1,000 grueling, uncertain steps, each one a battle against a system designed to keep the invisible out. The first war was waged not on the streets, but in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of bureaucracy. To exist on paper, he needed an address. To get an address, he needed a job. To get a job, he needed an ID with an address. It was a perfect, maddening circle of exclusion. Together, they spent days navigating lines, filling out forms that seemed designed to confuse, and facing clerks who saw only a problem, not a person. Her patience was a shield against his rising tide of frustration, a quiet insistence that this wall, like any other, could be dismantled one brick at a time. With a temporary mailing address secured at a local charity, the next front opened, the search for work. This was a more personal, more brutal form of rejection. He walked into diners, warehouses, and small businesses, his hope a flickering candle in the wind. The questions were always the same, a quiet interrogation of his worth. Where have you been working? Can you provide a reference? What's this gap in your history? Each hesitation, each honest answer about his situation was met with a polite but firm dismissal. The door would close, and with it, a piece of his resolve would chip away. He wasn't just being denied a job. He was being told that his past was an unforgivable sin. She was there to absorb the blows, to remind him that their no was not a reflection of his value, but of their fear. Then, a crack of light. It wasn't a career, not even a steady job. It was a one-day gig, washing dishes at a catering event, offered by a manager who was short-staffed and didn't ask too many questions. For 12 hours, he was lost in the steam and the clatter, his hands raw, his back aching. But at the end of the night, he held a handful of cash. It wasn't much, but it was his, earned. It was the first money he'd made in years that didn't come from a handout or a lucky find. This small victory felt monumental, a concrete piece of evidence that he could still contribute, that he was still capable. If you've ever felt the immense power of one small win changing your entire mindset, show some support by hitting that like button and share a story of your own breakthrough in the comments below. That single shift did more than put money in his pocket. It reconnected him to a world he thought had forgotten him. At the charity where he'd gotten his mail, he started talking to others. He saw his own struggle mirrored in their eyes, heard it in their stories of bureaucratic mazes and constant rejection. He was not an isolated failure. He was part of a silent army, fighting an invisible war for dignity. He began sharing what little he'd learned, which offices were more helpful, which shelters had an extra blanket. In helping them, he began to heal himself. The shame that had clung to him for so long started to dissipate, replaced by a sense of shared purpose and quiet solidarity. He was no longer just a man trying to survive. He was part of a movement, however small. The true turning point came weeks later. It was an interview for a janitorial position at a community college. The supervisor was an older man who looked at him not with suspicion, but with a weary understanding. He didn't flinch at the story of the streets. He just listened, nodded, and asked one simple question. "Can you be here at 5 a.m. tomorrow?" Those words were the key that unlocked everything. It was a promise of routine, of stability, of a place to be. The first paycheck from that job wasn't just paper. It was a declaration of independence. It was the foundation stone for a new life, laid with grit and cemented by the unwavering belief of a stranger who had become his greatest ally. The path ahead was still long, but for the first time it was visible. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, an unassuming envelope holding the weight of a different world. It wasn't just an interview, it was an invitation to a life he had only dared to imagine. The company was legitimate, the position a real career, a stark contrast to the string of rejections. This opportunity was a direct result of her tireless belief, her conviction that the man she saw was real. He held the paper, its crisp edges feeling foreign. It felt less like an invitation and more like a final judgment on the very possibility of his redemption. The gravity of this single page, representing every agonizing step forward, was enough to pull him right back down. Instantly the old ghost returned, their whispers louder than before. The voice of the man he used to be screamed that this was all a mistake, a cruel joke. Who was he to walk into that polished office, an imposter playing dress-up in a borrowed suit? The fear was a physical sickness, a cold knot of dread that tightened with every imagined failure. But this was different. Failing now wasn't just his own disappointment. It was invalidating her faith, the single anchor that had kept him from drifting away. He was caught between the person he was fighting to become and the one he was terrified he still was. The universe, it seemed, had one more test. 2 days before the interview, a mandatory background check form landed in his inbox. For anyone else, it was procedure. For him, it was a death sentence. The questions were stark, black and white, with no space for context, for growth, for the man he was now. His past wasn't a footnote, it was a blaring headline. He saw the opportunity turning to dust. He could lie, a tempting path, but that would betray everything he had built. Or he could tell the truth and watch the door slam shut, confirming every dark thought he held about himself. The integrity he was trying to live by would be his disqualification. That night he sat in the dark, the form glowing on the screen like a final verdict. The urge to delete it, to retreat into the familiar comfort of failure, was overwhelming. It would be easier. But then he saw her, asleep on the couch, and remembered her words, not of pity, but of potential. He recalled the rejections they had weathered, the small victories they'd celebrated. This wasn't just his fight anymore. In that silent moment, a profound shift occurred. The fear didn't vanish, but his desire to honor her faith finally became stronger. He would walk into that fire, not as a man hiding from his past, but as one forged by it. He filled out the form with brutal honesty. He even attached a short letter, not of excuses, but of explanation. He detailed his journey, the accountability he'd taken, and the resilience hardship had taught him. When he walked into that interview, he was no longer an imposter. He was simply a man who owned his entire story, the darkness and the light. He spoke not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced their worst self and survived. Whether he got the job or not suddenly felt secondary. The real victory was already won. He had faced the echo of his past, and instead of being silenced, had found his own voice. The second chance wasn't theirs to give, it was his to claim. After the monumental breakthrough, the protagonist, once lost in his own shadows, emerged with a clarity and purpose he'd never known. The raw, unfiltered belief offered to him had not just pulled him from the brink, it had forged a new identity. He wasn't merely surviving, he was thriving, and more importantly, he was giving back. His journey, once a testament to despair, became a beacon of hope. He started small, volunteering at shelters, sharing his story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a living example of resilience. His words, once choked by shame, now flowed with authentic empathy, resonating deeply with those who felt unseen, unheard, and undeserving of a second chance. He became the very embodiment of the hand up he himself had received. The long-term impact on both individuals was profound, a testament to the ripple effect of genuine human connection. For the protagonist, his past remained, but no longer defined him. It became a wellspring of understanding, fueling his ability to connect with others on a deeply personal level. He eventually founded an organization dedicated to providing mentorship and resources for individuals struggling to reintegrate into society, mirroring his own arduous path. For the one who had offered that initial unwavering belief, their act of faith blossomed into a legacy far grander than imagined. They witnessed firsthand the transformation they catalyzed, not just in one life, but in countless others, touched by his renewed spirit and purpose. Their initial courage had multiplied exponentially. The evolution of their relationship was perhaps the most beautiful and unexpected outcome. What began as an act of selfless compassion evolved into a deep, abiding partnership. The initial believer became a core part of the protagonist's new organization, offering not just financial support, but invaluable wisdom and guidance. Their bond transcended mentor and mentee, becoming a unique synergy built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and an unbreakable trust forged in the crucible of adversity. They were no longer just two individuals. They were a force, a living embodiment of what could be achieved when one person dares to see potential where others only see ruin. Their story became a quiet legend, a powerful narrative of hope. This journey delivers a powerful, nuanced conclusion about the profound impact of human connection and belief. It's not a fairy tale where all scars vanish, but a realistic portrayal of redemption earned through relentless effort and unwavering support. It reminds us that heroism isn't always about grand gestures, but often about the quiet courage to extend a hand, to listen without judgment, and to hold space for someone's brokenness until they find their own strength. The protagonist's story underscores that while personal responsibility is paramount, no one truly rebuilds a life in isolation. We are, at our core, social beings, wired for connection. It is in these profound bonds that our greatest transformations often take root. The legacy of this belief is not just in the lives transformed, but in the enduring message it sends, that even in the darkest corners of despair, a single spark of faith can ignite an inferno of change. It's a testament to the idea that every person holds the potential for extraordinary resilience, waiting only for someone to see it, to nurture it, and to stand by them as they reclaim their narrative. This story, in all its complexity and triumph, is a stark reminder that our greatest power lies not in what we achieve alone, but in the profound, often quiet impact we have on each other. What acts of belief have shaped your journey? Share your thoughts below. If this story resonated, please like, subscribe for more deep dives into the human spirit, and hit the notification bell.